Hey everybody, it's Booksy. This is an update for AMC December 14th, 2021. So today was quite a day. First, we had a lot of strange pre-market action that basically showed us what we were going to see today in a fractal form, but it was all going down, and I suspected we were going to get down to that 1989 level. Hopefully that was enough, that $20 or whatever we opened at today. I think it was 21. It's hard to say, but I will say this, that we definitely tracked the fractal perfectly, and there wasn't really anything in my mind that was way out of place. So first, I got to say that I believe that this was another iteration, and that I had previously said that I thought that this whole thing was the first part of, because of this dip. Remember, we saw that dip iteration here. I thought that was here, and it's not that it can't be. It just doesn't make a lot of sense as the side of this thing. And then if you look at this obviously looks a lot more like the dip. It just happened as a gap, very strange, after hours, and then you form the side of the you form the side of the T1. The T1 is this volcano-looking fractal. So that made me think that perhaps this was just a double iteration of this one, which is this region right here. That I just labeled it T, and I went through this in the previous video a little bit, what I thought was going to happen, and sure enough, we got that dip. It was very, very close to the way that I had drawn it. I wasn't sure if it was going to come back up to this level or if it was going to kind of respect this line. It did both today, so it came down. It touched right around 26 or 2260 area, and then it continued back up into this relatively, plain looking channel where it's just sort of sat the rest of the day. And every time it went up and made a new high, I was definitely celebrating inside, because even though, if you're looking at this from 1,000 feet up, you could look at this and say, oh, it's just like this area. But we know that it's not. We know that this area did not set up the t-test like this, that this was it's amazing, looking at this now and just knowing what we know, that this is that whole fractal, that head and shoulder fractal over here, and it just really changes the way you look at the stock. You're not just seeing it as like a bunch of, well, I don't know what's going to happen, different kinds of levels. It has to break this or that. It's like, we get to see our triggers today. We saw two of them go off this morning. They look like, if you blinked, you missed it, because they just looked like giant green candles appeared out of nowhere. And I don't believe that's random. Not when we marked it, day or 2 days ago. I guess it was a day. It was only yesterday. A long couple days. Not when we marked it yesterday as possible triggers, and then we saw them go off today. So that was really cool. I did get a little lost in the weeds today. I noticed that this formation right here, this sequence, is the same as the sequence that's inside the volcano. It's pretty much 1-to-1. There's a T1, T2, and a T3 in each of these. So that got me a little confused, and it made me wonder if this was like a macro T1. And then it was even more confusing, because then I saw this play out, and I said, that looks like a lot like the top of the T2 pattern. So I'm not going to lie, there were points in the day where there was a little bit of confusion about what might be what. And even now, I'm not convinced. I'm not 100% convinced that this is the T3. And I know it's going to bum some people out, but just hear me out. So if this is a macro, like a larger T1 formation, then we would say, like, this is this would be the entire T2 in this tiny little region. And it can do that, but it's almost more likely, if you look at the way this chart goes, there's a lot of similarities here, right? It's hard to ignore it. But then if you look at this bottom, it's a little strange. And it's possible that this is actually, you see this like going up, that this is actually all part of this move. There's just a lot of different ways to sort of approach it right now. And if you were to see it that way, you could see this as sort of the top, and it would be coming down. I'm not really 100% convinced of that right now. I want to leave that door open until I see that T3 really happen, because if it's not the T3, and we're actually still partially, and I'll show you another reason, but it has to do with, you see these motions right here? All right, they look really plain in this view, but there's another T3 that I want to show you that sort of helps give information about this. But basically, if it's not the T3 right here, this setup, and it looked a lot like it, but it could be, a lot of these fractals look the same. It could just be this whole setup happening. Then tomorrow we could see some downside in the morning, and possibly, pretty far, if it wants to kind of spook everybody. It's a possibility. But my expectation would be that this would be the action essentially, and you would get this sort of a V shape, the true one, and then you would get that rebound, and then we would actually set up. The other option is that this was drawn out, and it definitely looked like a drawn out version of this fractal on the close-up. But if that's the case, then this bowl action is what we're seeing being formed here. And so we would possibly see like a bigger bowl play out tomorrow. But either way, we definitely can say, that either this is or this is the T1. And then this is a T2 top. This is a T2 top. This is something like a T2 top, but you could argue anything, and I was really thinking this was the T3 by the end of the day. It just tracked really well. But the reason I'm mentioning the possibility is because when I looked at the this region, all right, I know you can't, I should probably do it on the 1 hour. You can see it better. You see the details a little better. Yeah, I mean, you could see this as sort of like the cliff. There's a couple peaks here that touch the top. So a couple peaks, and then there's a little cliff, and it kind of rounds out into the bottom, and then there's a couple bounces. So that argument could be made. If you look here, this shape, very distinctive shape, okay, has that sort of appearance. And this definitely looks like that ramp right here, okay, coming off the top of this one. So that makes me think, yeah, it's the T3. But when you look at this region back here, you see these, they just have this very odd like plateau look to them, and they do look a lot like these right here. And technically this is still going down. So even though it created this mountain in the middle, these spikes here look really similar. And then you could also argue that this region looks a lot like this region because there's this little head and shoulder formation here, in which case this would be more like this region. Okay, and that's the thing about these fractals, is that they're not 100% all the time. Now, if it is this region, then this downside could be more substantial. That's what I was saying. And then we might see it walk up into the actual T3, a macro T3, a bigger one. You see that larger cup and handle? So maybe it would form that larger cup and handle. So that being said, let's go to I'm going to keep this video really short today. All right, I'm going to invert my chart because I'm going to show you what I'm thinking for the future here. Assuming everything else we've talked about is correct, and I believe that it is, we're going to see a lot of head and shoulders. And so you can kind of ignore this other junk down here. I was thinking about where we might see some reaccumulation. One of my thoughts is that this R1, if this is the T3, right, and this R1 breaks, that it actually won't fulfill the normal requirement, which would be all the way up to 32. And that's kind of confusing. We're upside down. Because remember, this is the region that set up all those triggers. And normally your T3 sets up in a place where it can easily get back to the R1, but it's between this like Q and R region. Between this Q and R region, and you look here and you can see what I'm talking about. You see the Q and the R? You see how it sets up right beneath it? And that's where we got to today. So that's another reason why I was thinking maybe that's the T3. But to be honest, if it's the T3, then what would happen here would have to be just kind of a midway point. Sort of like what we saw in the macro fractal. You have these midway points. There's several of them, but that's kind of what we might see if it really just melts up, because you have to finish these shoulders. So I would definitely expect there to be a shoulder here, like a pullback here, to this region right around $26, and then it would maybe break up and continue going. The possibility is, if it didn't do that, that we get like a longer iteration, and it's not all considered one move. I don't know how that would work, but it could look like we're just playing out more of the fractals. So you might see this break up, and then you see an R1 reaccumulation, and then you see a R2 that breaks up pretty fast, and then maybe it pauses, here, and then we get the R3. And that's kind of spooky, because then you're like, well, what happens after R3 is distribution, right? And I would say, yeah, but it makes sense either way. So whether or not it's an R1 all the way up, right, that then has a bigger sell-off, or if it goes through this whole fractal and then we get to the distribution, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to have to finish this shoulder in order to really complete this formation. And that's why I had some stuff up here just thinking about this area. It doesn't have to come all the way down here, right? It wouldn't come as far down, but I mean, it could come down like a penny away and that would qualify. If I'm looking at these levels, you see this P level, I think that's kind of the level it might hit. So that would be right around 2750 area. That would be a big pullback, but it would be like a 50% move pullback, perhaps, so a retracement of about 50% on this macro move, which would make sense. And that just makes a lot of sense to me. So I know there's a lot of people out there who like doing they like doing the Elliott wave stuff. I mean, you could tell me if you could find a 5-wave with an ABC or something in there, A, B, C, and then it would go up. So like A, B, I guess it'd be like A, B, C, if this ends up being that. But my point is that you're going to get that shoulder, and what you would expect to see is that play out on the chart as you approach these like terminal levels. So like this particular spot right here, would be a break above. So the expectation is pretty simple, like that if you came down hard enough that you could actually come all the way down to this region, all right, and possibly even down to like 27. And it might set up like another inverse head and shoulder for the way back up, A, B, C, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it would do it again, perhaps. I haven't really taken a lot of time to look at these head and shoulder formations after they just kind of bailed on us and didn't work. So I think there's something there, though. Like you see this one and this one, they both would be opposite, potentially. So this could really drag things out a bit depending on how fast we go. But, I'm still thinking that the short-term uptrend goal here is back to like 45, like the normal range that we were in. And that's based on all these triggers that are here in place. And there's more up here, but we would have to sort of work through those. It's not just going to go straight up. So that's basically all I got for you today. Really good turn on the day. Really excited to see that. And yeah, it meant a lot to me that it happened today and that we got to see it kind of settle at that 2447 that I talked about for a long time. And I just hope it continues, the worst case scenario, in my opinion, is that the R1, I don't want to end with this. There is a worst case scenario, which is the R1 doesn't break the Q and then it ends up, somehow going into like a distribution lower and then it has to do it again. But based on like where we are and the amount of volume that came in today and the fact that we touched this channel, I just cannot see it immediately going back down, especially since we already did the bounce that the fractal requires. That's this bounce over here. So it would be a weird thing. That's this bounce. It'd be a weird thing to see. But we could cross that bridge if we get to it. I'm more bullish right now. I think we got the turn. We saw it today. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. And we will reconvene tomorrow.